Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of ClearHead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. Family relationships can be some of the most supportive and also the most challenging parts of our lives. In this episode, we dive deep into what healthy relationship really looks like and what to do when they're not. If you've ever wanted to find a way forward when your relationship have become draining or unsafe, or you want to learn how to set boundaries with friends and families, including your parents, this is the episode for you. Together with Dr. Sherrie Campbell, we cover the steps to protect our personal well-being while still creating space for connection, healing, and healthy family love. Our guest today is Dr. Sherrie Campbell, a licensed clinical psychologist and author known for her work on toxic family dynamics, where she specializes in helping healthy people cut ties with the toxic people in their lives. She is a nationally recognized expert on family estrangement, a best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, top 1% podcast host of the Therapy Sessions Cutting Toxic Family Ties, a well-known social media influencer, and a regularly featured media expert. Welcome, Sherrie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Sherrie, maybe you can kick us off with sharing with us, how did you become an expert on toxic family dynamics?
I was an expert long before I got my PhD. So I grew up in a highly toxic family. I'm in the 14% of people who had two toxic parents, not just one. So there were 9 marriages between my parents. So I also had the whole step family situation. I was the scapegoat. My sibling was the golden. So there's really nothing that I haven't experienced. And so felt like necessary to turn my predators to a purpose. And so instead of letting my trauma keep me stuck, I started speaking out loud, healing out loud. And now I've written 7 books.
Wow, that's quite a bit of a family background that you have. And it's so good that you have been able to, sort of distill what's happened for you to help others as well. Well, maybe to start us off, it would be good to maybe have a definition of what you would consider a healthy family relationship versus a toxic one.
So a healthy family relationship is supportive. It's unconditionally loving. The parents take responsibility for the relationship with their children. So the energy is flowing from the top down rather than depending on your children for your self-worth, and the energy flowing from the bottom up. I think that it has, everybody in the family has space to individuate and be who they are without someone enmeshing or hovering or rejecting them. And there's love and friendship involved in the healthy family system. In the toxic family system, there's absolutely none of that. There's chronic abuse, there's chronic neglect, there's coercive control, repeated boundary violations, and there is no way to individuate healthfully. And so what happens is you end up living for the system and in that web of destruction. And there's a lot of conquer and divide that's going on, a lot of gossip, a lot of two-faced situations. There's no trust, there's no safety.
And, we often think about how we behave as adults today, as almost like a remnant of how we coped when we were children and when we were dependent on our parents. And when some of the stuff you mentioned, the unconditional love, isn't there. And so in that context, other than when it's very obvious, there are obviously many shades of the spectrum. How did you figure out that you had the toxic family dynamic that you were dealing with, and how do you help someone who's in that situation recognize that they are in a toxic family situation? Because you might just, for a lot of people, they might just not be aware that they are in one.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different flavors. I think mine was pretty obvious. If there's 9 marriages between 2 parents, I think that's pretty obvious. I was physically abused as well by my father. So I had a very jealous and petulant, immature mom. So I don't know that any child looks out and tells the story that their family is toxic because it's all you know. I didn't really have any refuting evidence other than I knew my parents married more people than other friends of mine were married. But as you get into having your own children, and then especially as women get into midlife and we don't have those hormones cushioning us to a tremendous amount of tolerance. Many of us at that time in life start using our voice for the very first time. So I was 45 years old before I cut ties with my family. I was cut off, which was the game my whole life. And I never mended the fence. I made the choice to have protective estrangement. So having my own child was probably the first huge wake up call. And then in midlife, as my hormones began changing, there's a lot of research to show that there's a high divorce rate in midlife. I also think we're wise enough at midlife to know what we're doing and to not be shamed by society for making that decision because it's not an impulsive decision. At midlife, you've tried everything. So I think that I don't think as a child it stood out to me. I knew that I thought I was bad.
Exactly.
I didn't know that they were bad. And I don't think a child is ever going to tell a story to themselves that their family is bad because then they have no safety. So
that's right.
I tried to be good to make them good. And that was the story I told for decades.
That's right. It's very much a coping strategy, in the context that you couldn't fend for yourself. So as you said, a lot of that realization happened in midlife. And when you're, let's say, under 18, you're maybe not necessarily in a position where you could fend for yourself. So somewhere between 18 to, the sort of 18 to 45, for example, that's a period of time in which maybe the insight hasn't quite hit yet. What would you advise someone who has had a toxic family background to kind of start making that realization so that they can do the personal work so that they're not taking that baggage consciously or unconsciously into other relationships that they'll go into outside of their family?
I think you have to educate yourself. Again, I've written my 7th book is dropping in April. You have to educate yourself. For me to heal, I had to name it. For so long, it's like I had a cancer, but I didn't know what kind. So if you don't know what kind of cancer you have, it makes it very difficult to treat it. So I think as labeled out as society is, and I don't love that, I still do think it's got value in the sense that you've got to educate yourself and be able to name what's happening, name the character disorder that maybe your parents are suffering from, and typically they're suffering from more than one, and then to start naming patterns. So I started by educating myself. I read Children of the Self-Absorbed, Toxic Parents by Susan Forward. I read a lot of books back in the day, People Who Drain You Dry. Once I could name it, I got better at seeing it. That helped me grow. It helped me not to fall into the baited abuse where I'd be provoked and then I'd have the reaction they want and then they call me the abuser. So I would start with education. I think books are very affordable. I think, and then I would get into therapy and I'd really start individuating yourself from this super cell of the family that so strongly wanted to hold you to it and define and rob you of your own identity. I think you need to self-identify, individuate, and re-identify who you are, and then you can decide what kind of boundaries you need.
And so then, as you said, you had your PhD. What did you learn that was different once you sort of took a little bit more of that academic, clinical route that you didn't sort of learn about when you were just a lay person?
To be honest, I didn't learn anything about toxic family in my PhD. They don't educate well enough in that area. I learned, of course, the basic family systems theory that I learned in my master's and also in my undergrad. The difference in a PhD is you're actually just working more with the public, but there aren't good enough classes out there right now on toxic family. There just aren't. And I think that maybe there's aspects that there's a fear to educate people on it. What will that do to the family structure? What will that do to the family system? You know, the hope would be that it would start to heal things. But see, anyone can have children. And there's no test you have to take before you have children. So I did not learn anything that helped me with my family during a PhD. That does not mean my education wasn't totally valuable and wonderful and that I didn't grow in my own ways. But it's the books outside of my education from other survivors that I read that saved my life. And honestly, the book that helped me the most with toxic family dynamics is a book by Robert Greene called The 33 Strategies of War. I learned more from that than I learned anything from a family systems course.
What was the one takeaway from that book that you, as you said, saved your life?
Strategy.
Right. Strategy on how to cope and how to see what people are doing.
How to see what's coming, having some level of predictability, understanding that you might have to lose a few battles to win a war. What kind of leadership do you want to have? I prefer quiet leadership over verbose leadership or loud leadership. So I learned ways to have something to do. I had some sort of strategy, even if it was just within me and my mindset, that made me far more hard to penetrate for my family than I had before that book.
That makes sense. I guess that kind of alludes to this thing that you mentioned around estrangement. And you mentioned to me there are 5 types of estrangement, and no contact is one of them. You know, what be great for you to kind of break it down. What are the 5 types of family estrangement?
Well, I created these because the Oprah show came out and was upsetting to the community of people like me who've chosen protective estrangement, which is no contact. The Oprah show is lumping very recklessly all forms of estrangement and labeling all forms of estrangement as no contact. That couldn't be further in the truth. So if we go over them, no contact is protective estrangement. It happens when someone chooses distance to stay safe. It comes after years and decades of abuse, neglect, boundary violations, and it's not punishment. It's not in any way to punish your family. It is all about protecting and preserving your own well-being. And also, you guys can have more, you can experience more than one form of estrangement at once. Then there's scapegoating estrangement, which I was the scapegoat. And this is when one person becomes the family problem holder. They're blamed and targeted for everything, for telling the truth, for setting limits, for refusing their assigned role, and they are cast out, not by choice. So that cannot be no contact. Okay, they're cast out, they didn't leave, they were expelled by the family. And that is what happened to me. I got cut off, which was very common. So I would get cut off and it would be dead silent and then I'd have to fix it. Okay, so at some point at 45, I just ran out of the tools to continue to fix it, or the motivation, to be quite honest. Then there's parent-led estrangement, and this is when parents disengage from their own children because their children are setting boundaries, individuating, and maybe starting their own families, and they're not feeling the same level of importance that they used to their children. So the parent pulls away, and the child is left holding the loss. And this is not no contact. This is parental disengagement, right? So this is another form of estrangement that is not no contact. There's cancel culture estrangement, which is most commonly mixed up with no contact. But this is a reactive distance driven by outrage, public conflict, I don't get what I want. I'm going to have a tantrum. It's impulsive and performative, and it is not rooted in long-term family dynamics. You might cut off your dad because he didn't give you money or whatever it is, but it has nothing to do with anything long-term. It has to do with wanting your way right now. Okay, and that's cancel culture. Most people get no contact mixed up with that. Then, unfortunately, there's parent alienation. And this is due to influence. The child isn't freely choosing to distance themselves from their other parent, but they are being manipulated through fear and distortion, guilt, or loyalty bonds to not like their other parent. So no contact is chosen, while the majority of the other ones outside of cancel culture are influenced. Okay, so no contact is separate and different and unique all on its own. Not all estrangement is no contact. So I created, in response to Oprah's show for my following, that there are actually 5 different types of estrangement, and only one of them is no contact, and that is no contact. And I think that that's probably a helpful way for people to look at the nuances, because when we minimize what it takes for someone like me to go no contact and to be all by yourself in this world with a family that actually hates you, we need to have our voices and our choices as much as anybody else, right? And so that's why I came up with this.
When would you say it's time to use a no contact as a way to deal with the family dynamics or the toxic family situation?
When you have tried everything else, when you have tried therapy, when you have tried communication, when you've tried boundaries, when you've tried repair, when you've tried mediation, when you've tried it all, the bottom line is what people don't understand is that when you set boundaries, they're designed to keep people in your life, not kick them out. So if someone hurts your feelings and you let them know when you say blank, it hurts my feelings, if that person loves you and that person is for you, they will want to stay in your life and they will not say that thing that hurt your feelings anymore. If I were to tell my mother what hurts my feelings, she'd take notes. Oh, cool. Now I know how to get her next time. So at the end of the day, if you're not going to respect my boundaries, she's choosing no contact herself. But it gets placed on me and my boundaries. But anyone who really loves you and who's for you will want to stay in your life, and they will respect your boundaries. It's very simple. I think we try harder and longer with family than we do for anyone else. 4.5 decades of my life is a tremendously long time to have been tortured like that. Okay, so it is your last choice. I cannot tell anybody when that choice is. I have never encouraged any patient of mine to go no contact. I would never want to be responsible for that choice in someone else's life. I tell people you will know when. That has to be individual. That has to be based in that person's limits. It cannot be based in anything else.
And so, you mentioned that there are a few things to try before you go down the no contact rule. And one of them you said is setting a boundary, communicating it in a way that hopefully if the person cares about you, they will listen and either accommodate or come to some sort of compromise where both parties feel heard. How do you first define a boundary? How do you set a boundary?
Boundaries, like I said, they're designed to keep people in, right? Boundaries are protective. If you have no boundaries, you will be taken advantage of, and you will live very resentfully and bitter with a lot of bitterness. And there's no point in living that way. Boundaries can be verbal. They can be written. They can be done by shutting your mouth and using your feet. In other words, you create distance from somebody physically and emotionally. Boundaries can be set in all kinds of those ways. But in the setting of the boundary, you have to be careful not to think that your boundary is going to change someone else. Now, if that person is for you and they love you, they'll be more than happy to make a change if they accidentally hurt your feelings and had no idea that would hurt you. And but that most people set boundaries and then they come back in my office, so they're not respecting my boundaries. And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to. That's called boundary testing. You have to respect your boundaries. So what does that mean? If they test your boundary, you either reinforce it again or you don't respond. Okay, not responding doesn't feed them what they want. They want to get you off balance. They want to get you baited back into the relationship. They want you over-explaining. They want you over-functioning just so that they can whip you around in a million mental circles that you can't get out of. So if you set a boundary, you have to uphold that boundary with your own behavior.
Can you give an example, a common example that you see in clinical practice of a boundary that is set, and then how your client had to reinforce the boundary?
So I had a client who's
just unfortunately lost a baby at 8 months. Her family's incredibly, incredibly toxic, and she asked for some space over the holidays to heal. So her mother said, well, so you mean that I can't see you? And she has other kids and the kids on the holiday. And my patient said, I just need this holiday to be with my family, my husband and my kids, and just heal. Next text was, well, I can see the kids on December 13th or 14th at this time. And I helped her negotiate this. And we went back and said, respectfully, you're not hearing me. We don't want to see family. We want to grieve our baby. They just had the celebration of life. And so my patient blocked her mom's number for now. That was her choice. So the mom now reaches out to the husband. So now that wife feels a bit betrayed because the husband, she just wishes he could just block them just for these holidays and then they can negotiate from there. So this mother doesn't take no for an answer. In fact, acted like no was not said at all, and continued to pester my patient. And this woman led herself all on her own to give my patient no other choice. My patient felt there was no other choice but to just block her for now. So that is what she's doing. That is what boundary testing looks like. This is the way she has to uphold her boundaries because her words are not working with her mother. So if words don't work, your behavior has to work, and silence often does the trick.
Yeah, that makes sense. So boundary setting in this case is less about what the other person can't do, but it's what you have to do when you've clearly communicated what you needed. And in this case, you've set the boundary as you don't want to be contacted during this holiday period to heal. The mother did not respect that, so she had to put in place things that prevents the mother from keep on contacting her.
And it's hard. It ripped my patient up internally. Yeah. She doesn't understand why her mom has such little compassion to let her grieve the death of her baby. It's one holiday season in the dent of a lifetime. Why can't this mother step back and just give her the space to grieve? Right? So it's disheartening that there's such an entitlement to your children for toxic parents. And there's no words that were going to work for my patient with her mother. And so the only choice she had was to just be quiet. And that's how she reinforced the boundary.
Yeah. And as you said, it really cut her up. And so for many people, even thinking about setting a boundary or reinforcing the boundary is very difficult. They feel guilty. How do you help your patients work through that?
Well, in my book, Adult Survivors of Emotionally Abusive Parents, I talk about that not all guilt is created equal. There's really healthy guilt that helps us develop a conscience and it makes us want to do better. But then there's maladaptive guilt, which is being made and influenced to feel guilty for something you didn't do wrong. It is not wrong for my patient and her husband and 3 kids to grieve the loss of their baby alone. Why? She doesn't want to go out and perform that she's happy at the holidays, right? So, and the baby's death it was tragic. I mean, it wasn't SIDS, but it was something close to SIDS. And it was terrible. I mean, I can't even imagine. My heart breaks for her, but the selfishness of her mom to be like, well, those are my grandkids and you're my daughter and these are my holidays. It's not a winning formula for this woman. And so you have to look at, are you feeling guilty for something you're doing wrong? Is it wrong for her to want to grieve, for one holiday season. No, it's not wrong. And so we release ourselves through that. I even have my patients hold guilt sort of metaphorically in their hand and just toss it up. Let it go. Let it go. It's not yours to carry. All of her mom's needs are not her burden to carry right now. She can hardly carry herself. She can hardly get herself out of bed in the morning. She shouldn't have this kind of pressure, especially from her mother, of all people.
And, not everyone will have a therapist. And obviously, if you do feel you're struggling alone, don't feel that way. Clearhead is an EAP provider, and we have hundreds of therapists that can help, and some that specializes in family dynamics. And so in that case, if you don't have a therapist that can kind of help take the more objective perspective to help you work through whether the guilt is something you've done or not, what else would you advise how to work through things? As you said, when you were a child, the way you coped was you blamed yourself for your parents' behaviors. How do you know you're not just doing the same thing again when you're feeling guilty, that you'll just blame yourself? And so that's why you'll cave when someone tests your boundary.
Read. Books are affordable. There's such great education that you can get. I grew up with what I call paper parents. So Little House on the Prairie, that series about saved my life as a kid. I pretended that was my family, and my imagination was incredibly vivid. And then when I wanted sound, calm, rational, responsible advice, I never turned to my parents. I turned to books. So, but the bottom line is you have to be willing. I can give a million solutions, but you have to be really willing to want to tell a new story about your life. I see far too many survivors so stuck in the sad story, and they're just retelling it and regurgitating it and retelling it and regurgitating it. And that will be your life. And now it's self-abuse.
And why does that happen? Is it because they have low self-worth, or how, it sounds like there's another thing at play here that you need to kind of work through.
I do think that there's probably a payoff to staying stuck to that sad story, and that maybe there's a certain amount of attention it brings to them, or validation maybe that it brings to them. But you can't grow in that space, right? You have a life in front of you, and you have a life today to live, and you really want to get after that. And you can't do that passively. I think you've got to put a lot of effort into your healing. My healing journey is my most passionate pursuit. I'm more passionate about my healing journey outside of my daughter than nearly anything else. Because I have felt things to depths I didn't know human beings were capable of feeling, which was terrifying. And I have worked my ass off to pull myself out of those places in a way of growth and connecting to the self. I journal like crazy. I've probably written 600 journals. So between reading and writing, when I couldn't afford a therapist, it was great therapy. You have to commit to it.
And, we spoke a little bit about how children are dependent on their parents for survival. So let's just say you have a child who's under the age of 18 who have great self-awareness. They've done their own reading. They realize they need to set boundaries. Are there any tweaks that needs to happen when setting a boundary as a child rather than as an adult?
Yeah, there's some part of going along to get along that you have to do just for your safety. I would gray rock quite a bit, which is, I think it's almost like people pleasing, but it's conscious people pleasing. So gray rocking is just kind of becoming the most boring rock in the pile. You are not going to reveal a lot of very deep things about yourself, but you're going to be friendly and cordial, and you're going to kind of keep it surface level. That kind of adds some protection. But you have to live under the rules that are there as long as you're dependent. And so if you're doing so mindfully, and it's coming from you rather than from fear, then it's a whole different experience going through it.
we've talked a little bit about when to recognize someone is in a toxic family situation, how no contact can be a way of coping, and how it starts with, before you go there, you start with setting boundaries, and how that differs depending on what stage of life you're in. So let's say you've been able to do all of that and you've been able to have that space you need. What does healing actually look like? And then as you heal, does that mean that your level of no contact, for example, changes to low contact? Or like how do you ever get to a resolution, or is it just an arm's length relationship now that you have to deal with?
I mean, certainly any decision can be changed, but I think it happens inverse to what you just said. I think we all start off with very high contact, high hopes. I think that we come in with a lot of empathy. And then when they're not respectful, you kind of downgrade to sympathy. You go to low contact, right? You try to like, almost like if there's a porch, that's high contact, then you demote them to the yard, not because you love them less, but because you think maybe the relationship would be healthier at a little bit of a greater distance. But if they mess up the yard and they mess up the party, then they're going to go to the fence, and you're going to have compassion there, and you're going to have cordial contact. And typically, toxic family members move themselves into no contact by how irate and inappropriate they behave the more they get boundaries. I have yet to meet someone who was no contact who went back. The reason that is that the character disorders are very proven not to change. I had one go back because she had to in a caregiver situation for her elderly mother. So we had to really strategize on how to keep an emotional distance and contact low. It was a very transactional relationship for her at that point. So there are those situations, but I don't think that in no contact, you work so hard to get there. It's the last thing you'd ever want. And you're so clear that you can't heal in an environment that poisons you. And when you're low contact and cordial contact, and one phone call with these people takes you down to be depressed for 3 weeks, there's really no going back. And that's what makes no contact unique, is that it's not even about them. It's about self-preservation. That's it. I don't have any hatred. I don't have any resentment or any bitterness toward my family. I've worked through those stages of healing, but I don't have those. I love them, but I look at love like the liver. The liver continues to regenerate. I don't like or respect them, and I don't have people in my life that I don't like or respect. It doesn't matter what their title is.
Totally. And so what does healing look like? How does someone know that after they got no contact, that what's the next step of the healing journey?
Well, it gets messy typically, because there's a lot of post-separation abuse. You're going to be cut out of wills and trusts. You're going to have the flying monkey storm swarming your house, your social media, but it's your mom, but it's your dad, blah, blah. So you have to, I can't imagine going through that without therapy. I did. At that point, I think you need to invest in yourself and get into a therapist, because you're going to, for 4 of my 10 years, those first 4 years were just unbelievably abusive. I could not believe how sadistic these people became, all because I set a boundary. It's like they wanted me out of their lives their whole life as the scapegoat, but that was only until I left. So it's so bizarre. There are certain aspects of it I don't know that I'm ever going to fully understand. Thankfully, I don't think I'm sick enough to understand it, and I'm going to count that as a blessing, and I hope all of you do as well. I also learned, and one of the biggest things in my healing is that the why are they that way? It doesn't matter. Is there a why that really would ever make sense anyway? I mean, the why is a necessary stage because it gets you researching and you start learning things and you can name things now, but why is someone a serial killer? I mean, if they went on in court and said, well, I kill people for sport because I'm mad. I mean, it's like, it would never make sense, right? So accepting them for exactly who they are is so hard. but it's healthier than staying stuck in the why. Because if you get into why are they like this, you'll get into why me. And that is, you can spend some time there because you probably need to cleanse that as a layer of your healing, but you need to move into reality and acceptance and taking responsibility for your own life and your own happiness. And that's where the healing, that's when healing starts feeling good. You've got to grieve a lot though. And you're going to grieve at every stage of your healing. Today, I grieve the living dead.
How do you make sure that you then don't take this into your other relationships? Like, what are the things that you advise your clients on?
If they are afraid that they are doing that, we talk about what those things are. Most of my clients jump into therapy when they realize they're carrying some of those things on. But I got to tell you, the one gift of trauma is for many of us, not all, but for many of us, it actually increases EQ because you're experiencing the depths of such mature experiences at ages you're not mature enough for. You have to develop sort of an intuitive sense about yourself to survive those things. And some just become horrid abusers. Maybe they don't have that in them. I don't know. But who I was raised by, they've been an incredible pillar of exactly what I don't want to be, which has turned me into a phenomenal parent because I've been able to counteract what was done to be passionately not doing that to my own child. There's times I look at my daughter and I can't even imagine treating her the way that I was treated. It's unfathomable to me. The love I feel for her wouldn't even allow those thoughts to enter, let alone the actions to happen. Right? So I think it's self-awareness is the key. Educate yourself, get into therapy, journal.
Mm. And, what about if you're the person just supporting someone going through this? So you have great family, but you can see, say, your partner really struggling with this. What would you advise the support person to do?
Validate, support, don't give your opinion. If you haven't experienced this, as Brene Brown would say, you have no business giving an opinion. Support and validate what you don't understand. I'm certain that's hard because my boyfriend went through that with me. But there were times that he really wanted to fix it. He thought he could fix it. And he can't. You can't fix other people. You can't change other people. So a lot of what I get is, I know, but do you think she really meant it that way? If anyone else had said it, people would be like, get out of that relationship. That's so toxic for you. You add family titles and suddenly that goes away. That makes no sense to me. And I talk about that in my TED Talks. So that just doesn't make sense to me. I think you have to support. And if you haven't experienced, your opinion isn't necessary. Just love and support. Validate. Why would anyone want to make something like this up? It doesn't serve you. No one wants this. No one wants this. I promise you, no one wants this. There's not one listener in today's audience that would want this. This isn't fun. It's painful.
Yeah, and stressful. Totally.
Yeah, let alone having to now defend yourself to your partner because they don't understand it. No. Support. Don't give your opinion. Validate.
And obviously we're coming to the holiday period, Christmas time where everyone comes together. That might bring up old family tension. What's your advice for people who are trying to maintain boundaries during these holiday gatherings?
So if you're in no contact, it's just start your own traditions and make it as loving as you can. For my first few holidays, I would sort of spend time with my pain in the morning so I could let it go and not let it block me from enjoying my day. I would write letters to my pain, to my grief, to my loss, to my family. That was very helpful. And then I would burn them ceremoniously and let them go. If you have some contact, I would go with a plan. I would maybe show up a little late, leave a little early, keep yourself consumed with helping so you don't get stuck in gossip or conversation too deeply, and just have a plan, have an exit plan and an entrance plan.
Sounds good. Well, I mean, we've covered quite a few things, Sherrie. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, just, I think, love yourself. Love yourself enough to do some really tough things. You are capable of it. Your pain is not bottomless. I've had experiences of human pain that were terrifying, but you find your way out. It's all about, you're not by yourself, you're with yourself. You have to learn to be friendly to yourself, with yourself, get to know yourself. When you're someone that you actually like and you're like, she's pretty cool, I really like her. That makes life a lot easier. And just love your children if you have them. It's such a corrective experience to love in the ways that you were never loved, and to see the success of your child flower from all that love, and be proud that you've broken a cycle and you've stopped that trauma from going down into the next generation.
How do you manage this when, you're interacting with a toxic family member, and they're trying to create a narrative about you, and now it's all being played out in the courts?
I mean, it depends on that situation. I mean, I don't know what's at stake in court, right? My grandmother left money for my daughter's 4-year education in a trust, and my mother blocks me from that.
I could create a lawsuit. It's not worth it. I let the money go. So you're going to starve me back using my child? That's so sick to me that I don't know. The money feels like an energy to me, and then it felt very dirty. So I didn't want the money. Would it have been nice? Certainly. But the emotional toll, or the cost to my psyche and my heart and my spirit that it would take to go to court with her, for me personally, it wasn't worth it. If I'm able to pay for my daughter's college education on my own, which I am, thank goodness, then if not, I would have taken out loans. But I don't know what's at stake. I don't feel it would be fair to speak on that broadly. Because if it's a parent alienation situation, I think that's felony criminal. I do not think toxic parents should be turning their children against the other parent. So I would have to know on that one, just all humility, what was at stake to say, is that worth it or not? I don't know. So parent alienation, I think it's worth it. A trust for a kid, just wasn't worth it to me. I let that money go. It wasn't worth it.
That makes sense. All right. Well, it's been so lovely to chat with you today, Sherrie. We always end these things with one question. It's just, what's your one wellbeing practice to stay mentally well?
I journal. I really heal through my hands, but also movement. I think getting outside, breathing fresh air, walking, moving, thinking, having a spiritual life is fundamentally important to me, and animals. If I ever win the lottery, there's going to be signs, because there will be a farm full of animals. So I think there's love everywhere. And it's looking at ways to find that, and just continuing to reconnect with yourself. And those are the things that are my staples, and have continued to this day to be habits that I do daily and weekly.
That's it for today's episode. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, check us out at myclearhead.com and drop us a message. Love our content? Share it with a friend, or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening, and catch you on the next one.